I've done a series of videos talking about dating, politics, age, feminism, etc., and they always end up with feminists getting really mad at me. So just warning y'all, I don't care. You know, you're allowed to be mad, but I'm going to say something that's going to make, this video will make a lot of feminists upset. I did a segment a couple weeks ago or a week or so ago talking about how feminists are abandoning feminism because they can't get dates. And I think I have data to show exactly why this is outside of politics. You see, one of these big stories that came out recently in October was about a woman named Emma Sulkowicz. She used to be considered one of the wokest of the woke, but now she's hanging out with Jordan Peterson fans, conservatives, and libertarians. And in a story, she writes that it started with Tinder. She met a guy. That guy didn't want to date a woke person or something like that, and she did. And that's kind of how things play out. That's the assumption, at least. It was a big story when some British celebrity said he doesn't date woke women, and feminists got outraged. An article was then written, which included the Emma Sulkowicz bit, explaining the reason they are outraged is because if women can't get dates, they are socially unappealing. They will abandon those views. Most people hold views. It's unfortunate. They hold views because they think it's going to get them social acceptance. There are a lot of things many people believe they wouldn't publicly say because they know they will be ostracized. It would be bad for them. So long as pop culture, mainstream media, and our general culture tells these women, believe this, it's what everyone thinks, then they're going to adhere to it. Which brings me to the first bit of data, which I find fascinating. James Pethokoukis, sorry, I can't pronounce names. You guys know this, right? Nearly 8 in 10 Democratic women say they would be unwilling to date someone whose view of Trump contrasted with their own. For Republican men, Trump is much less of an issue. Now, this is interesting, and I think I know why. If someone has been inundated with information on Twitter, say that the orange man is bad, the worldview they've crafted is that most people hate the president. So when confronted with a man who says Trump's not that bad or that they like Trump, they're going to view them as the odd people. They're not mainstream culture. If they want to fit in, they will try their hardest to maintain that view of the president. But what happens when everyone around them keeps saying, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong? Their views change. Like we saw with that story talking about Emma Sulkowicz. When she went to date a guy, that guy turned out to be a conservative, and she didn't go running and screaming. She said, tell me more, I'm interested. Now, I'm not questioning her integrity. I'm saying people, human beings, they do this. Which brings me to the main story. Partisan attachment. How politics is changing dating and relationships in the Trump era. Findings from the January 2020 American Perspective Survey. Now, this is the survey that actually brings up this data point. But they talk more, not just about Trump, but also about government spending, affirmative action, immigration, climate change, gun rights and control, LGBT rights, religious freedoms, and abortion. Here's what they say. No issue is a bigger deal breaker in dating than abortion. And this makes total sense. Abortion isn't something intangible like whether or not the orange man is truly bad. Like whether or not Trump is bad or not is like a personal opinion based on a ton of factors. Abortion, however, is basically the woman saying, I'd like to be able to do a thing. And people choose in their individual liberties and freedoms. And this is where we get a big deal breaker. How difficult would it be to date someone who does not share your own views of the following? And it would be impossible, say 24% when it comes, this is U.S. adults, when it comes to abortion. Probably because when it comes to men or women who are pro-life, they say absolutely not. And pro-choice women, men or women, will say absolutely not. 44% said very or somewhat difficult, and 32% said not too or not difficult at all. So it's the minority that finds no difficulty. We then go down and say religious freedoms, LGBT rights, gun control. I'm going to now tell you what the biggest threat to woke feminism is. Assuming this thesis around women wanting to date as a big factor in what they believe, I think it makes a lot of sense. Let me say a few things before I show you the next chart. I think on average, people want to feel wanted. They want to know that they are the best of the best. So when it comes to dating, when you have a ton of people coming up and telling you how awesome you are, it feels really, really good. I mean, when it comes to anything, sports, whatever, you accomplish something, people come up and say you're the best, it feels really good. How do you think someone would feel if they never get complimented, if people never say, I like you or I want to be with you, and they feel like they're unwanted or unattractive, and they're going to become pretty unhappy. I mean, there's whole message boards dedicated to people who are incels. Many of these people feel unwanted or like they can't win. But the issue is, some of these men are actually average looking dudes. They're not ugly, but they just feel that way. What do you think happens when someone adopts an ideology and all of a sudden now nobody wants to be around them? Check this out. This is old data, but it lines up with a lot of what I've been talking about in these segments going back the past, several months, actually. Republicans have a millennial woman problem, reports Vox. Nearly 70% of young women say they are leaning toward Democratic candidates in the midterms, which makes for an interesting conundrum when it comes to matchmaking. Check this out. Let me read a little bit first. They say, so this story is very old. It's very old. It's from June 2018. But the data from Pew is enlightening. And I'm going to take this data and then extrapolate it as to how it pertains to dating. A new survey from the Pew Research Center finds young women between the ages of 18 and 34 far and away prefer the Democratic congressional candidate in their districts. Their preference for Democrats is significantly higher than that of women of other age groups. Women overall are likely to lean blue, with 54% supporting or leaning the Democratic candidate in their district this fall versus 38% who favor the Republican candidate. But 68% of young women are choosing Democrats, compared to 24% who prefer Republicans. Now, this is where the bad news comes in for conservative men and Democrat women. First, let me actually zoom in on this image. It's kind of small for those that are watching. We can see that there are more Democratic women than Democratic men. As we just learned from the previous article from the American Enterprise Institute, women find some things untenable in dating. If you support Donald Trump, they ain't gonna date you. So what happens when there are more women than Democratic men? That means men are in demand and women are the supply. There are more women available. So if you were to take 43 men and offer, and 54 women and put them in a room, the 43 men will find a partner and the remaining women will not. Those women will have no choice but to cross the aisle to seek out Republican men or the best they can do because it's general dating marketplace, supply and demand. If those 11 women don't want to be alone, they have no choice. But what if their views conflict? Well, they either be alone and lonely, like many women actually do, or they change their views. And that brings me to the bigger conundrum, in my opinion, pertains to millennials and to women. I'll tell you why. Republican men make up the supply, and Republican women are in demand. There's only, out of the 100, you have 38 women and 49 men, which means those 38 women, you're going to have dudes fighting over them, like tooth and nail to get that woman, right? But that's going to leave around 11 Republican men. What is this? Well, that's actually really interesting, those numbers, right? Because they will both end up crossing over and finding each other, creating a more moderate middle, or a couple that really hates each other for some reason. But no, I think they're going to have to respect, each other. This brings me to the first tweet and why the problem is for Democrats and the left. It's why the right isn't saying, I don't want to, or, it's why the right isn't having the problem for the most part. Or at least, I shouldn't say that. I should say it's why we don't hear about that in media as much as we do about the feminists. They say when it comes to Republican men, they don't really care about your view. Would date someone with a different view of Trump, 52. 48 would not, compared to Democratic women, 79%. The dudes don't care. So technically, I would say it's good news for the women, but dude's going to date anybody. Dude's going to date, Republican, Democrat. It's like, whatever, they're less likely to date a Democrat woman. If the Democrat wants to date the guy, she's going to have to change her views because the guy is less likely to. The guy is going to say, I don't care, I'll date whoever. But for her, if she's going to choose a mate and there's no men available, the only remaining, people left are 11% of Trump supporters, she'll have to get rid of this. Now it's possible they say, 21% would have no problem. But what happens when some of these women who hate Trump end up finding a bunch of men who absolutely hate Trump. Those, or the women who are slightly ambivalent find someone who hates Trump. You're going to end up with a small fraction of women who have no choice but to date a man they said they would never date. Their views will likely be changing. The Republican men ultimately don't care. They're ambivalent. It gets even worse when you look at millennial women, because the supply of millennial men is much lower, with around 21%. So if we were to break it down to 100 men and 100 women, that means 21 women will be without a date unless they cross over and try and date a Republican man. But as we saw, they wouldn't do that. So they can choose to fight, be angry, complain. Not to mention a lot of these Democratic guys turn out to be abusers. It's fair to say that Republican men face a similar problem, that you've got 26% on the Republican side, more men than women. The issue is the guys don't care. They'll date whoever. And come on, let's be real. I'd be willing to bet you take any guy and guys are less picky in a lot of ways than women are. So for guys, it's not that big of a deal. For women, it's a much bigger deal when their only option is to say, you know what, I guess I have no choice but to date a Trump supporter. Guess what they'll do? They will change their views. And that's what we've been seeing. And that's why we've seen several articles come out saying, no, don't do it. Don't date these people. They're evil. I kid you not. There's been more than one. I covered one of these Vice articles. We talked about it. Now, this data is about women being Democrat or Republican, or men being Democrat or Republican. But when you combine it with this other data and these other concepts, it starts to make sense. Women seemingly will have to break down their views a bit more than men would. If the men don't care about what you think about Trump, they're not that extreme in their opinions. The women who say straight up, I won't date a Republican man or a Trump supporter, have a much more extreme opinion. So this 68% of millennial women will become more moderate, it would seem. I could be wrong about all of this. I'm just interpreting the data in that way. So if you think I'm wrong, just tell me I'm wrong in the comments, but I will leave it there. Stick around. Next segment's coming up at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. Podcast every day at 6:30 p.m. And I will see you all next time.